I want to bring in Bret Schafer. He's a social media analyst and communications officer for the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Bret, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start first with the Georgia Secretary of State saying this week that viral video was very possibly the result of foreign meddling, which is deeply concerning, but not necessarily probably surprising.
No, it's not surprising at all. And this is actually one of a few different cases that we've seen in the last week where the intelligence community has come out and said that Russian operatives are behind videos that have attempted to show some sort of fraud in U.S. elections. There was another case in Pennsylvania that seemed to show election workers ripping up ballots there. And again, these have been definitively attributed to the Russians. So it shows that the Russians understand that a real fault line in our election is our trust in the actual administration of the election.
Right. And so, look, we were just outlining it in that piece before you as well, but there's what we see in the lead up to Election Day. But then Election Day and whatever period might exist between Election Day and when we know the winner, there are real concerns about misinformation, disinformation spreading. What are your biggest concerns around that?
Yeah, when I started this job back in 2018, that was my first sort of major U.S. election. Our biggest period of concern was before the election, because that, of course, is what would affect somebody's vote. But then now we also have to look at the election period itself, because that affects people's confidence in the process. And then the period after the election, because that affects people's confidence in the results. And so actually, it's sort of flipped now. We're most concerned about Election Day and the days after, of course, because of everything we've seen over the last 4 years. So we're already starting to see the information environment shift. So no longer is the disinformation really targeting the candidate or the party or the policies. It's now flipping to the process. And so we're seeing things like vote rigging, ballot stuffing, concerns around mail-in ballots, drop boxes, all of these things that we've seen over the last 4 years, we're seeing once again.
And it really just undermines a fundamental tenet of our democracy, which is free and fair elections. And we have done so many reports showing these election workers who are just public servants trying to make sure that everything is perfect and right. And I know you've talked about what if there is just an honest mistake that's made. That could really be exposed and really just presented in a fraudulent light on social media.
Exactly. The weaponization of honest mistakes is one of my biggest concerns. I mean, there are thousands of different election jurisdictions. All of them are run by humans. So there will be some human errors. There will also be things that are totally out of the control of election workers. So a printer will break down, something won't work, there will be some process that gets screwed up a little bit. And most of these things are correctable. They're not a big issue. But when they're weaponized on social media, when they're presented as, see, this is evidence of widespread fraud, that's where the real problem comes in. And the second thing I'm really concerned about are people who are going to show up to their polls and actually try to test the system. So they might try to get into confrontations with election workers. They're actually hoping that these confrontations will go viral because, again, they can point to that and say, our vote is being suppressed. There's some illegal activity happening at our local polling place, and using that again to create this perception that there's wide-scale fraud that's happening in this election.
And so while all that is happening, X, of course, owned by Elon Musk, who continues to spread a number of lies and disinformation on his own platform. But X has eliminated most of its content moderation staff. Meta has decreased the visibility of posts about politics on Facebook and Instagram. And look, there are corners of these platforms or pieces of these platforms that are hotbeds for conspiracy theories. And so you have what you're talking about, and then you now have this platform for them to spread so quickly.
No question. And the calculus, I think, at the platforms in 2020 was they needed to be really ramped up and ready for election mis and disinformation because they didn't want a repeat of 2016. That calculus has changed now. The political consideration is it is more advantageous for us to be seen as not censoring or over-moderating content. And so I think they're largely going to be hands-off around this election. I think the one bright spot is election officials are far better prepared to fight some of this stuff. So it wasn't like they weren't prepared for mis and disinformation in 2020, but I don't think they were as prepared to fight back from a communication standpoint. And I think election officials really understand they not only need to administer a great election, they need to communicate that out because we can't rely on the platforms to be taking down or moderating content. That's just not going to happen this time around.
Yeah, it is amazing to see how many steps they've all taken to increase transparency, that sort of thing, really come up with a communication plan. Bret Schafer, thank you so much for walking us through that. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.